You're listening to Give Me the Fear, the Britflicks Podcast Frightfest 2023 preview series. My name is Stuart Wright, and usually I host this show, but for this genre talent-filled build-up to the Woodstock of Gore, I'm keeping stum. When this intro is done, this is the last you're going to hear from me until I ask you to tell your friends all about it. The spoiler-free interviews are brief, and across the entire series, you will discover the kind of knowledge and experience about how to make horror films that they just don't teach you at film school. Are you ready for that? After looking back at the blood, sweat and tears that went into their creative successes, I asked them one last question. If you could handpick one person to be in the audience, alive or dead, famous or personal to you, for your Frightfest screening, who would it be and why? I think you're going to love the answers this question elicits. I certainly do. That's my introduction over with. Let's hear from the talent.
My name is Jenna Kanell, and I am the lead actor and writer of FACELESS After Dark. FACELESS After Dark is a meta horror about an actor who finds a little cult success and decides to take matters into their own hands. Something that you'd only know if you were on the inside of script development was that when I was working with my co-writer, Todd Jacobs, we had to delve into, because of the meta nature of the film, we delved into a lot of things that I've actually dealt with as an actor in a cult film and as a female presenting individual in the industry. And it took a lot of, there was a lot of unpacking of events and deciding what we should use, what was too much, and what we needed to expand on when we were writing. I mean, if you see the trailer for Faceless After Dark, there's kind of almost a joke in it about writing what you know. And that's absolutely what we were going for, of writing what you know while expanding on it to make it a more exciting story. And one of the things that was fun when we were developing the script was finding the tone, because to me, it feels very much like a dark comedy. And to him, it felt more like a horror. To our director, he approached it as more of a thriller. And finding the happy place of that tone was a challenging but fun tightrope walk. Something that I'm really proud of from the production of the film is that this is one of the most diverse crews I've been on. It was an indie film, and so it was a small crew and a tight crew, and everyone was wearing 3 million hats. But this is probably the most women I've ever seen on set. It was racially diverse. Everyone had different backgrounds in terms of their experience. And that made for a really, really cohesive team in a way that you don't always see on film in general, but especially on these indie films where you're really crunched for time and you're crunched for resources. And I'm really proud of the team that our director, Ray, assembled. I also did some producing on the film. I definitely helped a lot. I helped cast most of it, and I definitely helped bring on a lot of the team members as well. Some of it was just a happy accident because we're in Atlanta, and Atlanta is an incredibly diverse market. And also, a lot of the people we hired were people we had worked with before. And some of it was intentional. That I both really value inclusive sets and feel that the best stories are told because, as you know, this is a team sport. It's a collaborative medium, and stories are best told when you have a lot of different perspectives bringing something to the table. Because obviously, I co-wrote it, and it was one thing when we wrote it. But then, they say you make 3 movies: the movie you write, the movie you shoot, and the movie you edit. And once it's off the page, it's not just yours anymore. And that's terrifying, but it's also really beautiful because then you have all these other people helping mold it, And so in a way it was intentional because, yeah, inclusivity is really important to both of us. And the movie, it follows a female presenting person, but it's also a queer story in a way. It kind of in a way, Faceless After Dark is a little bit of a queer horror, and there were a ton of queer people on set, and I think everyone enjoys making something more when we feel like we have some sense of agency in it. Even if you're doing makeup, if you're doing catering, everyone should have a sense of ownership, and I think that Ray and I both feel that strongly. Obviously, he still always had a very strong vision for what he wanted, and we didn't always agree, which is, good, because it's important that he maintained exactly what he envisioned from the moment that he asked me to write it. But at the same time, he was open to ideas and definitely valued what everybody brought. I was involved in a little bit of post-production, not too much, because given that it's my face is all over the damn thing, which is very cool and great, but at the same time, it makes it a little harder to be biased. And also at the same time, Ray and I have, I do direct as well, but Ray and I have very different tastes as directors. And I obviously wanted to offer what I could that would help in terms of the writing aspect and the creative aspect, but I didn't want to step on his toes in terms of what he was going for. But that being said, he definitely came to me a couple times in post-production. Like, I tried not to be too involved, but he would come to me with, at different stages of the editing process, essentially to say, because I have a ton of experience in horror, and I'm also a huge fan of horror and watch a lot of horror movies and have been in a bunch of horror movies. And so he would come to me and kind of try to get my eye on, does this part work? Do we need more of this or that? And I wasn't crazy involved in the post-production, but he did get my input at a number of stages in terms of the edit, which I thought was great. And I really appreciated that I was roped in on that aspect of it. Because when you're editing a film, and I know this from experience, when your eyeballs deep in it, it's so hard to see what you're looking at after a certain point, If I had to pick one person to be in the audience for our Frightfest premiere of Faceless After Dark, it would make me incredibly anxious, and I would probably need some sort of, it would make me incredibly nervous, and it would put way too much pressure on me, but I would love to have Jordan Peele in the audience, because I just love the films he creates. I want to work with him so badly one day. I just think he has such an interesting perspective and such an interesting mind and such a valuable approach to horror and existential dread. And that's a perspective that I would love to have.
I'm Sophia Porta, and I play Claire in the MOOR.
Hi, and I'm Chris Cronin. I'm the director. The MOOR is a mystery horror film based around the Yorkshire Moors. Claire is approached by the father of a murdered childhood friend of hers to help her investigate the haunted moor, because he thinks that's where his son's final resting place is, and that's where the film starts.
Well, one memory actually popped into my mind straight away when I read this question, and I've never experienced before, and I probably won't in the future. We were shooting a scene outside, me and David, and there were just flies everywhere, like little midges, but to the point where you couldn't really sort of like inhale properly or like sort of blink properly, and we were like battling through it, and it was just, I felt like it was a moment where I thought, this is mental, and what is this going to look like, and are we doing a good job? And then when I watched it in the film, I was like, gosh, I'm so proud of us, the actors in it, and also whatever you did in post, Chris, to make it look like there were no flies there. But I thoroughly enjoyed shooting that film. It was like actually shooting that scene. So again, I thoroughly enjoyed shooting that scene because it was a challenge, and then I enjoyed watching it because you saw no flies.
I think that's probably some of the best acting in the film, just because you had to pretend there was no flies crawling around your ears. So, so there's literally between takes. So the editing is masterful there, because they'll be like proper in character, totally zoning their intention, and then like slapping themselves and then carrying on. And it's seamless. But yeah, there was thousands of midges in that shoot, and we thought we were going to have to scrap it or do some real digital enhancement. But as soon as we color graded it, like 90% of the midges disappeared. So no magic here, just you guys keeping a straight face and seeing it through.
Well, that's amazing, honestly.
Yeah.
That it looks that good, yeah.
I forgot all about that. Obviously, we were terrified about the footage on the day. Now I don't think about it anymore. Well, I remember it was basically a treatment when I got it. So I read it as a treatment. And what really appealed to me was it was based in my home county of Yorkshire, which is quite unusual. I'm always thinking of far off places and how to bring it to Yorkshire and how can I interpret it in my home county to make it a bit unique. But this was already embedded in the material. And it was the ending. The ending of the film was so striking. It made me nervous. And I was like, oh. And I heard a famous quote from a director that says, if the film makes you nervous, you should do it because it means somebody probably hasn't done it yet. So based in Yorkshire, a horror film, ending made me nervous. I'm like, I'm in. And then it was basically developing it from there. So we went from a treatment to a script, and it was in the treatment completely found footage. Even though I respect that genre, it's not my personal strongest genre to create. So it was all about how do we maintain the found footage elements, but also tell it through a lens that I can tell it. So it was because found footage is its own genre, man. And I was like, I want to delve into that. I don't want to completely live in it. And so I really liked the last, say, 9 minutes of the movie where we completely live in it. But it was all from the treatment, really.
The rain in the moors was intense, or just generally the moors. It was hard work. It really was. Mm-hmm. And there were moments where, we weren't quite enjoying ourselves because we were wet and cold and not only were we trying to get into these mindsets of this like horrible stuff that was happening, it just generally wasn't very nice conditions to film in sometimes. But I know, Chris, you've said actually that I think that the moment that I'm talking about when it was like really, really rainy. But as we've spoken about, actually it just adds to it.
Yeah. It's Hollywood effects for free, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, I think I know what Sophia's talking about. There was a shot where it's just a single take. Claire and Bill are walking with the backdrop of the moor behind them. It's miserable weather. And it looked good. It just looked good. And we got 2 coverage side shots. They were getting into the flow of it. We were trying not to trip over and fall on the floor. The fact the cameraman and the sound guy didn't disappear down a groff was a miracle in itself, never mind the actors. And they did about 3 takes each, and then we got coverage, that kind of thing. And then the heavens opened up, as it does on the moor, just randomly, and the mist set in the background. And I just looked around and went, this looks like 50 times better. And everybody's like, run for cover. And I went, I want to do it all again. And everybody had a little bit of a word with me. And then we did it again. And it's probably my favorite shot in the movie. So it was just the dry shots were just a dry run for the atmospheric footage that we actually captured in the end for that sequence. One of my favorite sequences. It's just unedited, Sophia and David in the elements, in it, feeling it. You can feel like you're on the moor with them then. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes.
The challenges were consistency and continuity because of there's a line in the film that goes, it's the inconsistency in the air pressure, and it feels like a saving line, but it's actually just the truth. Like the moor is its own environment. So schedules would change on a dime just because the mist was rolling in and we wanted to capture it. So we would be shooting a scene for a couple of hours and you'd have 3 different weather conditions. And so post-production was really trying to play around, like, how do we make this feel like this was all in one moment and not spread it across a couple of days and stuff like that. That was quite challenging. And then it was also about, it was just really interesting. Sophia and David, just because you're here as well, I'm not saying just because you're here, but the performances are so good that I was just so careful with trying to make sure that their emotional journeys were consistent throughout, because it's very character-led, this piece. And if you felt like they went too hard on the emotion or too far back, you just lose that journey a little bit, because they do go through a change. They go in different directions as the film progresses from each other. So that was a challenge. And then just making sure the found footage didn't feel so out of place when it did show up. We wanted to make sure it was like effective when it rocked up, and it wasn't just jarring. It was meant to always be there. Do you know what I mean?
My non-no my granddad. He's dead, but I know how buzzing he would be to see me on a big cinema screen.
I've got a bail answer. It's William Friedkin. And it is a bail answer because he's just recently passed. He's probably one of the most influential men on horror. And I'd be curious to see what he thinks of some of the elements of the movie where we do the genre change and we do the format change. And I wonder if he'd be like, oh, this is brilliant, or this is disrespecting the genre. I'd be very curious, because I think he's one person that wouldn't be shy to share his opinion on it.
Hi, my name is Joe Lynch, and I'm the director and executive producer of the film that you're about to see, or hopefully will see someday, Suitable Flesh. Suitable Flesh, based on the H.P. Lovecraft's short story of The Thing on the Doorstep, best way to describe it is an erotic body swap, cosmic horror, phantasmagoria, bouillabaisse. That's also a love letter to one of my favorite filmmakers, Stuart Gordon, and the films that he had made in the past, From Beyond, Reanimator, Dagon, and the like. It follows the trials and tribulations of a very successful psychologist who haphazardly meets a new patient and finds out that they have a lot in common, but also a lot of differences. And next thing you know, there's a lot of body swapping, there's a lot of fluid swapping, and then there's a lot of bloodletting. I think one of the most significant things about becoming part of this production is knowing right off the bat, since I've been a fan of Stuart Gordon and Dennis Paoli and Brian Usna and Barbara Crampton, who were kind of in this family of Lovecraft adaptations over the years, I was a fan already. So when I got an email about 6 weeks into the pandemic from Barbara, which anytime that you get an email from Barbara Crampton, you open it immediately, asking me if I was interested in possibly adapting The Thing on the Doorstep, which is what it was called at the time. And I was very much intrigued, but I've had this situation happen to me before where, I have a lot of heroes, and Stuart being one of them. And unfortunately, when they, pass off onto this mortal coil, sometimes I get the opportunity to find out more about the project, whether I'm involved inherently or not. But in this case, it was directly, do you or would you be interested in directing this film? And I had already known about it because I had talked to Stuart about it over the years when I would go to the Masters of Horror dinners, and we would sit together and, we would just kind of shoot the shit and chew the fat. And he was talking about this project, and I went, oh my God, that'd be great to see you and Dennis and Brian and Barbara kind of coming back into the fray, just like old times. That, as a fan, that got me really excited. But now here's this dangling cosmic carrot of, would you be interested in directing? And at first I thought it was a bit of a prank, to be fair. But lo and behold, Barbara reconfirmed that no, when Dennis and Stuart were talking about the making of this movie, and when Stuart kind of, I guess, saw his days numbered, if you will, kind of made a list of some of the directors that he was interested in taking on the project. And I like to joke that after they had asked all the other filmmakers, they kind of got down to me. That's my MO usually. But but Barbara kept saying, like, Stuart really felt strongly about at least seeing what you would do with the material. So I'll never forget the 24 hours between getting that email and then, getting the script. And again, this is in the pandemic time. So I was kind of sequestered to my home, and my writing partner was in another country at the time. And we were kind of going back and forth on these ideas, and both of us were huge Stuart Gordon fans. So I sent it to her. We started reading it, and immediately, without even kind of hinting at each other's notes, we both came back with this idea that, like, what if we tried something different, the way that we approach the story? Because if you know the story, it is a very male-gazed, very male-centric telling of what happens to these two main characters, Edward and Daniel. And we felt, what if we swapped genders, and not just to be progressive, not just to do the whole oh, this will be cool in this day and age, and this new purview of how, you can gender swap a more male-centric thing into female and then see what happens. Like, watch out, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels with chicks, or Lethal Weapon with girls. this was something that was almost kind of inspired by how filmmakers that we loved, like Stuart Gordon, like Paul Verhoeven, like Claire Denis, would want to kind of twist the screws a little bit or do things that felt a little dangerous. And at this time and this age, being able to tell this story with these characters in a kind of new point of view felt so much more exciting to me, felt so much more provocative and dangerous in all the best ways without being exploitative. And both of us came up with this note session that was so exciting to when we were swapping it back and forth going, oh my God, this is so crazy. You know what? They'll never go for it. And lo and behold, we sent the note, like my partner Becca came up with this, like this whole notes dossier, like a docket, if you will, that was all of our ideas all put together with the idea that this was probably not going to go, that they were going to say, great guys, thanks a lot. We're going to go to Adam Green. And shockingly, both Barbara and Dennis came back and said, that's a really intriguing idea. Give Dennis a couple weeks, but we like the idea. And a couple weeks later, got another email, and it was this new version of the script. And it wasn't like he had just changed the names and, went into final draft and started just kind of fucking with the names. It dove deeper into a lot of the thematics of gender and sexual identity and obsession. And especially since, one of the first things that came up was, well, what's the age of Elizabeth Derby, for example? And what's the age of Daniela, her best friend? And I kept saying right from the get-go, we should, if Michael Douglas could play this character in his late 40s, early 50s, we should find someone who's in their late 40s or early 50s too, because there are the same amount of desires and obsessions and consequences that come with those. Why not? Like a lot of times it's always, well, if it's a female, then we should make it someone who's in their like late 20s or something. And I'm like, no, I'm like not late 20s. Like that doesn't make sense. If she is a psychologist and a successful one at that, it runs into the issue that I know that Stuart ran into back in the From Beyond days when Catherine McMasters, who Barbara played, was kind of criticized for being too young, and also too beautiful, which makes no fucking sense. So that was something that we very early on said to ourselves, we wanted to really hang our hats on that idea. And everyone was very much excited about that idea. And then that's really what changed everything, for the script, to the casting, to the production itself. It really, that was the impetus, and that was the seed that we planted that changed everything, all the way down to the title being, going from the thing on the doorstep to Suitable Flesh. It just made it so much more exciting as a fan. And it also helped me with this thing that Brian Usna told me way back when we first met, right before we shot. I kept asking him like just things about Stuart and advice, and he kept saying to me over a plate of nachos, just ask yourself, what would Stuart do? And every decision informed that. What was great about that, though, was that it also reminded me, well, what would I do? And they were very much always co-joined, from the casting to the script, to the production, to the editing, to the music. It felt like Stuart and I were very much in sync, even if it was, from beyond the grave. One of the things that I was really excited about after we had gotten the script to a really good place was that one thing that I had never done before, and I always, since I started to be like in terms of my filmography and my career, I started off very much in the horror genre and the horror realm. And then, like between Everly and Mayhem started to kind of create a hybrid of interests in terms of like horror and action or horror and comedy. And then with the movie that I did before this, Point Blank, it was more or less like a Walter Hill type action film, more or less. But my heart is in horror. It always has been. It always will be. And I really wanted to find something that would bring me back to all the excitement that I would have when I was working in that genre specifically. Playing with those notes, playing with those brushstrokes. So when we got the script to a really good place, one of the things that we, in the writing process and the development process was realizing that this isn't necessarily just an H.P. Lovecraft story. It's not just a cosmic body swap movie, so to speak, that has a lot of, connections to Cthulhu. It's got a lot of ties to Miskatonic. I was very specific when we were doing the rewriting to tie it back into certain movies and certain characters and locations that we all know and love from the Reanimator days and the Miskatonic days and from beyond. So it definitely ties a lot of those films together. But I also was like really excited over the idea that as a filmmaker and a storyteller myself, I always want to kind of do something different. I don't like being trapped in like a, I guess, what's the word? Like a cliche of doing the same thing over and over again. I didn't want to be typecast. I hate that. I would rather be challenging myself as a storyteller to just try new things and try different subgenres. And I've never done anything in the psychological erotic thriller realm, and I was a product of the 80s and 90s where erotic thrillers were all the norm. They were on HBO and Skinamax all the time. They were on video shelves. They were part of our popular culture. Everything from Brian De Palma's Dress to Kill and Body Double to Claire Denis' Trouble Every Day to obviously Paul Verhoeven's work in The Fourth Man or especially Basic Instinct. And then in the 90s, there was this like explosion of Zalman King and Adrian Lyne, and even David Lynch was getting into the game with stuff like Wild at Heart and Lost Highway. There's something very powerful about sexuality in films that has kind of been lost in the last couple of years. And it was something that I honestly missed a lot. I think gone are the days where a lot of times couples would go to the theater to get aroused or, get your rocks off, whether it was back in the 70s with going to see Deep Throat together or going to see Sliver, at the multiplex. Those days kind of have waned a little bit because television has opened up the world for sexuality on camera. Obviously, the advent of internet porn has changed the game a lot, which means that now you are devoid of story and character. You're just kind of going right for the graphic money shots. And I got to admit, man, like I miss cinematic seduction. I miss those days where, you could, as long as it was indicative to the story and to character and not just throw Michael Biehn and Patsy Kensit in the middle of an espionage sci-fi chase thriller and then put them in a hotel room and have them bang. That aside, if the story is shaped and forwarded by sexuality and sex, then all the better. So that was something that we realized very quickly when we were kind of in the development of the script, but also when it came down to the execution, that I wanted to make this movie sexy. I wanted to make it feel like it was a 90s erotic thriller that would, have people like Shannon Tweed on the cover and then have those films and those films have a very specific aesthetic to them. So being able to take the spirit of what Stuart Gordon, and to that, I mean, Stuart is also, a prognosticator of provocation. He knew how to push people's buttons, not just with violence, but also with humor and with sexuality. And I thought, like, there's my perfect starting off point. But when you see the movie, you'll definitely very quickly stylistically see that we're taking grace notes from Brian De Palma with stuff like split screens and split diopters and, provocation from, say, like Abel Ferrara when he was in his 80s days with like everything from King of New York to, China Girl to Adrian Lyne and Paul Verhoeven, like all these filmmakers that really were never afraid to get sexy and to get erotic. So that really informed a lot of how we shot the film, how we specifically lensed certain scenes, how we executed certain transitions in and out of scenes, how we lit some of the actors, how we clothed them, like by having those as our influence points, it definitely informed everything in production from the moment we stepped on set to the moment I finished the last cut. Everything was kind of coming from those states of mind, while also being able to kind of do my own thing as well. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the pressure of having a lot of filmmakers of past and present kind of influencing the film was exciting, but it was also really daunting too, because what we're presenting is something that even down to using a sexy saxophone in the soundtrack, and the way that we did the score that was done by Steve Moore, who's never done anything like this before, but we were going for if Bernard Herrmann and Pino Donaggio had sex, then there was a sax guy in the background. That was kind of the vibe we were getting. Everything was going for cinematic seduction. And, if anything, I wanted to take Lovecraft and turn it more into Lustcraft, if you will. I mean, one of the biggest challenges for making this film was that most people, at least these days when they're booking gigs, and I'm talking about like actors and DPs and stuff like that, they're not used to having, oh, wow, there's sex in this. A lot of times lately it's either been written out of the script or not even talked about at all or seen off camera. Intimacy has been so much a part of cinema for decades. And then all of a sudden it kind of dried up, if you will, no pun. But we wanted to get moist again, if you will. So that's where complete and in these days of the Me Too era and making sure that everyone is completely on the same page. Right from the moment that we started even talking to actors and actresses about being part of this, I started very, very directly and distinctly detailing everything and how I was going to shoot it, from 32-page legal documents telling everyone how I was going to shoot it, to storyboarding out every single shot. The key to this is consent and communication. I didn't have any meetings with any actor without them fully reading the script. I even said, I don't want anyone who's going to be doing a Zoom with me or meeting with me to go into this having not read the script, because I don't want to waste anybody's time, including myself. So everybody who I talked to, including Heather and Judah and Jonathan Sheck and Bruce, Barbara was obviously involved from a producing standpoint, but she came on later to take on that role, but she was very aware of it. And she's, been in these situations before, as have most of the actors as well. I needed to be incredibly upfront, and not in a douchey sort of way, more just of a, look, this is the movie we're making. And, I'm putting out all the reasons why I think it's really important that we make this film sexy and we make this film erotic, because the choices that some of these characters make, you need as an audience member to put yourself in the shoes of Elizabeth Derby, for example, Heather's character. You need to see why she would make the decisions that she's making. And if you don't show sex in a way that feels like, well, here's this person who's having sex with someone who she's had sex with, her husband for years, and then suddenly she's starting to have fantasies about this patient of hers, you need to personify that visually, performance-wise. You need to, because the story is essentially being told from her point of view, and she's trying to relay that to her best friend while in a padded cell at Miskatonic University, you need to convey this. So we need to make it sexy. So have every conversation we've had, from the moment that we were talking to a lot of these actors all the way up to the moment when we were shooting it, and even after, was all about comfortability and consent, and making sure that all those actors were on the same page. And thankfully, every one of them got it. Every one of them was, very comfortable. Everyone made each other comfortable in it, because, there's nothing worse. I think all of us can agree, there's nothing worse than being in a sexual situation where the partner of yours is not into it or not giving consent. And that's a big no-no, obviously. So we wanted to make sure that these situations were, because they're only going to get sexier if you know that the people involved are into it, down to the camera people. I had conversations and I had meetings with the camera operators who were on set. One of which was a female camera operator who I specifically asked for, so that if at the very least on the surface level, the actors would know that it wasn't just two leering dudes in the background, shooting stuff like a bunch of stalkers. All of us had these conversations from the get-go to make sure that everybody knows, everybody's aware of what we're going for. We're not trying to and we've all heard the horror stories of yes, we have a closed set, but then all of a sudden a producer shows up and is like, oh, where's the tits? None of that was on the set at all. And lo and behold, we had some of the best days I've ever shot on scenes that otherwise in previous films, whenever I've had sexual situations in other films that I've had, I've always been incredibly nervous and very embarrassed that I'm even there. I'm like, oh, should I be watching this? This is so crazy. Like not in a goofy sort of way, but like I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. So like for me, it was just a matter of making sure everybody was chill and comfortable and feeling the vibes. We would try to do everything we could to kind of make everybody feel comfortable. And from number one on the call sheet, Heather, all the way down to any other person that was on that very close set, everybody was in sync with exactly what we were doing. And I think that can be displayed on screen. One of the big exciting challenges with this, and from a post-production standpoint, was that, we didn't have a lot of time to make the film for both budgetary reasons and stuff like that. It's a low budget film, but what that granted was that gave me a lot of creative freedom too. But we just didn't have a lot of time and a lot of resources. Thankfully, my co-editor was also on set. Whenever we would be shooting stuff, I would get reports back from them saying like, oh, did you get this? Did you get that? Like, oh, maybe if you got a shot of the fan, that would really help. So as a pro tip to other filmmakers, the more that you can integrate your editor, if it's not just going to be yourself, because I also co-edited the film, whenever you can strive to have the editor as involved from the jump, even before you start shooting, the better, because then you're going to be able to leave that location. We shot in Mississippi. We weren't going to be able to come back ever. Like there wasn't like we have a budget for additional days of shooting. This isn't a Marvel movie, that was never going to happen. So if there was any pickups that we had to do, we would have to do it back in LA. And shockingly, the only shot that we had to not even just reshoot, but pre-shoot was and I don't want to give too much away, but there is a very famous, iconic location that you've seen in other movies around this Miskatonic verse that I had just happened to realize was in my near vicinity. So I just on my iPhone shot it thinking like, oh, you know what? We'll come back here and we'll shoot this after. When we got back, we did not have the resources to do that. So luckily I had that shot that I had shot before we left for Mississippi on my iPhone, dropped it into Premiere Pro, and boom, I put some letterboxing on it. You'd never know the difference. So there, but that was, otherwise it was making sure that we left that location with everything that we needed shot, and of course things got dropped here and there, but for the most part, that's what made it a big challenge. Was I kind of knew from the jump that we were not going to be able to return. So being able to have editing going on concurrently with the shoot ensured that I was able to say, like on the final day of our shoot, for example, when we had like one of the longest days of the shoot because we couldn't come back and we were going to lose our actors. And this one shot just kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed. And it's a shot as innocuous as it's curtains going on fire, right? They should have been shot on location. We couldn't do it then. It kept getting bumped and bumped and bumped and bumped. And then on the last day, it was, this has to be the last shot, because I guarantee you, we will not shoot this when I'm back in LA, unless I'm going to the producer's house and lighting their house on fire. Not happening. So if I didn't know that, I probably would have punted it and said, oh, we'll get it later, but we couldn't. So we knew that we had to leave that location with everything finished. What I discovered when we were in post was that, for all the best intentions that you have when you're coming up with all the planning that you could think of, every shot, I unfortunately took a cue years ago from like M. Night Shyamalan or even Hitchcock, when they would say, well, whenever I walk on set, I know exactly what I'm shooting. Everything's cut in camera beforehand, and I'm an editor myself. And so I thought, well, fuck, I have to do that too. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to think that I had to have everything completely pre-cut, so to speak. And that's one thing that I always love in movies too, when you can see that the filmmakers are thinking ahead about like transitional scenes and like, things cutting from one thing to another, and there feels like there is a rhythm to it. It's not just like chop, 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 chop. There's a rhyme and a reason for every moment in a scene and out of a scene. I appreciate that, and I know other people do as well. And we do a lot of that in this film. But you also have to relinquish those pressures, because sometimes a shot that your B camera got, we had 2 cameras on at all times. Sometimes a B camera shot just got the better moment, or they got a moment that maybe the focus puller wasn't on their game at that moment, but you went, doesn't matter. That acting moment is right there. Her eyes are looking at him, and that makes total sense. Or we ran out of time on this one moment. And I'm not going to give anything away, but there's these 2 moments that I am specifically so proud of from a horror movie standpoint. And I like to lovingly call them the smashing and the stabbing. And you'll know it when you see it. But one of those moments, the smashing, was something that I had been wanting to do for almost 15 years now, in terms of like executing this certain moment, right? And it was not in the original script, and I kind of put it in thinking, hey, if we can do this, this would be amazing, and I think it'd be very iconic, and it would work really well. And that was a moment that like I needed to know exactly what I needed, because there were no cuts, there were no compromises in terms of how it was executed. If it didn't work, it was never going to work. But because we spent so much time on that moment, we were running out of light, and we only had this one location for maybe another hour. And I had like maybe 6 or 7 more setups for the stabbing moment, which again, you'll know when you see it. And I ultimately could pull off 2. And it was heartbreaking. It was absolutely heartbreaking. It was the moment that, that scene in Pee-wee's Big Adventure when he's running inside the pet store and would like run past the snakes and go, oh, and then run away. And then he'd come back and be like, oh, I'm going to get to that. No. I was always putting that moment off. And I was terrified, because I'm like, I don't have the coverage for it. The only thing that I thought of at the time that I was so lucky that I did was that, again, there is a moment with stabbing, right? And for all you filmmakers out there, pro tip, if you ever have someone stabbing something or someone, especially if it's a body part, always have a watermelon at hand. And this is something I learned from my trauma days, is for some reason, watermelon can sustain the integrity of something getting stabbed on it. That feels very much like flesh and bone. And because we had done something similar a couple nights ago, I'm like, you know what, just in case, I'm going to have a watermelon just like in my car. You never know when you're going to need it. And thank fucking God I did, because we had this, we were chasing the light. We had 30 minutes left. I got one shot off, and I'm like, I'm never going to get this. And I ran to my car, grabbed the watermelon, put it down, and said, stab this. And thank God, because not only does it give you some good pull, right? But if you stab it a watermelon enough, red gook is going to fly up in the air, and that's what you'll see, right? But again, 2 angles. That was it. And I was terrified. And, after, going back and forth on how we can approach this moment, my co-editor said, leave the room, just get out. I was like, okay, fine. And I left, came back in an hour, and they had figured out a way that made that situation work so fucking brilliantly. To me, it's the perfect Giallo moment. And again, I think for you Giallo fans out there, you'll know when you see what we did. But that's something that was never planned. It was never in the construct in my head. And as a director, you always have a kind of a predetermined idea of exactly what's going to be on that screen as much as you can. And you want the control over it, but sometimes you have to let go of that control, because someone else is going to have a better idea, and it's only going to make the movie better. And those 2 moments together are like the symbiosis of our collaboration together, because one is something that is so controlled that we would have never been able to get otherwise if we didn't have the wherewithal to kind of come up with something in like a wonder, if you will. And the other one is a pure melange of edit mayhem. I think it's a forlorn conclusion who I would pick if I wanted to have one person, alive or dead, at that Frightfest screening. And that would be Stuart Gordon. 100%. Like his spirit hovered over this entire production from the moment I got that email to every screening that we've done ever since. The film is dedicated to him. Little hint, if you're in the audience, stay to the very last moment. You'll get a nice chuckle out of it. But Stuart was one of my inspirations, one of my heroes. I was honored enough to call him a friend. The fact that he thought about me before he died to kind of take on the reins for this script. It's one of the biggest heartbreaks that I could never possibly show him the bloody fruits of our spoils, so to speak. To be able to show him that he did mean so much to so many people on the stage, on the big screen, on the small screen. That's why we had so many actors who show up in the film in like Easter eggs. Some company people from his other productions, everything from Reanimator the musical to King of the Ants to obviously his other films. They showed up for I don't want to give too much away, but they showed up to do it for basically nothing. And that's a testament to Stuart Gordon. So if there was anybody who I want to have a seat, and I hope that anybody from Frightfest knows, like, they should keep a seat open and put reserved for the maestro Stuart Gordon, because if anyone's going to enjoy that, seeing it on that huge screen and giggle the entire time, it's going to be him.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with at least one friend. Put a link out on social media. Rate and review it for your preferred podcast platform. Put an ad in loop. Novel the town crier. Whisper in the ear of the town gossip. You get the picture. It all helps bring new people into the Britflicks Podcast fold. Thank you.